This video is going to cover a walkthrough of numbers 7 and 8 from chapter 26, which are goodness of fit tests. Number 7 focuses on the ethnic breakdown of New York City police officers and compares it to the under 18 population in the city. It gives us a number of percentages for both of those groups. And we're going to start off by writing our hypotheses. Remember, for chi-square hypothesis tests, we skip the p and we write out our hypotheses verbally. So that parameter is kind of written into the hypotheses. So null hypothesis is that the ethnic breakdown for New York City police officers is consistent with the ethnic breakdown of the city's under 18 population. And the alternative is the same thing, except we're saying it's not consistent with this population. Now, I'm not going to walk through every little step because that was already covered in the notes video, and I'm only going to focus on key points. So for example, making this table. These observed counts are from the sample. Okay, so the sample is based on the actual 26,181 police officers, and it said of those officers, 64.8% are white, 14.5% are black, etc. Right, so these are actual officers. I just took this sample size and multiplied it by 64.8. Since these are actual officers, I rounded all of these observed counts to whole numbers. Okay, we can't have a fraction of a police officer. For the expected values, we're using these numbers up here. Okay, and since these are expected, it's okay to have decimals for expected. So observed must be whole numbers. Expected, it's okay to have decimals. Assumptions and conditions, randomization, 10% we know how to do. Counted data, we're switching our percentages to counts. We have to do that. And expected cells, we have at least 5 for each category. So at this point, we're going to put this into our calculator. We're going to make two lists. We'll say we'll put the observed values in list 1 and the expected values in list 2. Okay, now we want to go into our tests, and we're looking for a chi-squared goodness of fit test. Depending on your calculator, it's probably listed as a chi-squared GOF test. Okay, it's going to ask for each of those lists, the observed and the expected. Okay, it's going to ask for degrees of freedom. Degrees of freedom is the number of categories minus 1. So we have 4 degrees of freedom. Calculate it. We'll get a chi-square value of 1651 with 4 degrees of freedom, and that gives a p-value of 0. Essentially 0. Okay, if you draw it, you'll see that this curve is skewed to the right. It's not unimodal and symmetric like the t-distribution and normal distribution. So based on that p-value, we're going to reject the null hypothesis since that p-value is small. There's sufficient evidence to suggest that the ethnic breakdown for New York City police officers is not consistent with the ethnic breakdown of the city's under 18 population. Number 8 is a bit of a dark question. We're looking at 1,857 women who were murdered by men in 2005. And in particular, we're looking at the weapons used in those murders and seeing, are these used at the same rates as weapons used in all murders? So our null hypothesis is that weapons used in murders involving violence against women follow the same distribution as weapons used in all crimes. Alternative is the same thing, except we're saying that it's not following the same distribution. Again, we want to make our table. This time it's telling us what our observed counts are, and we have to figure out what the expected ones are based on these percentages. So just take these percentages, multiply them by that full sample size, which is up here, 1752. Okay, remember it's okay for the expected values to be decimals, but it's not okay for the observed values to be decimals. Assumptions, we expect that we're getting at least 5 in each category. Randomization, 10%, you know how to do. And counted data, we've switched our percentages to counts. Again, this is a chi-square goodness of fit test. We would make our two lists again. We get a chi-square value of 389.5. That's with 3 degrees of freedom. Degrees of freedom is based on the number of categories minus 1. There's 4 categories. It's not based on the sample size. P-value is essentially 0. So we'll reject the null hypothesis because that p-value is small and find sufficient evidence to suggest that the murder weapons and crimes involving violence against women do not follow the same distribution as weapons used in all murders.